My name is Ursula Hale. I am 68 years old. I used to be a school librarian for over 30 years, a quiet woman who believed that if you were kind to the world would be kind in return. I raised my son with that belief, teaching him to use his voice with courage and his heart with dignity. I never imagined that someday, silence would be the only thing left between us. The last real conversation I had with my son, Evan, ended with 5 words that changed everything. "Mom, stop coming to our house." He stood in the doorway of their coastal home, hands still on the doorframe as if ready to shut it at any moment. The wind from the ocean blew against his hair. For a second, he looked like the little boy who used to run to me when thunderstorms scared him. Then his eyes hardened. "The house is under renovation. It's not safe. Don't show up unannounced." Behind him, my daughter-in-law, Lena, gave me a polite smile. Too polite. I held a box of homemade cookies. Lemon shortbread was Evan's favorite. Lena did not take the box. She only whispered with perfect courtesy, "It's really not a suitable environment for someone older. You should stay comfortable at home." Someone older. Not mom, not family, just someone older. I did not argue. I never argued. My hands tightened around the cookie box and I nodded. The door closed. Not loudly, not aggressively, just firmly enough to make sure I understood. For 4 years, they kept that boundary. Every attempt I made to visit was met with a text message. "The house is still under renovation. We're busy. Some other time." I learned that heartbreak rarely arrives all at once. Sometimes it comes visit by visit, silence by silence, until you stop knocking entirely. After my husband died, the house grew too quiet. I kept busy, volunteering at the library, teaching knitting at the senior center, tending to my tiny backyard garden. Every Thursday, I baked something and told myself I would drive to see Evan, but I never did. A mother knows when she is no longer welcome. People think loneliness sounds like sobbing. It does not. It sounds like a clock ticking in a kitchen at midnight, like a house settling as it cools, like the soft clink of a teacup when there is no one to pour tea for. Then, on a bitter January morning, my phone rang. The name on the screen was unfamiliar. "Mrs. Hale, this is Arthur Keene. I am the attorney representing your son, Evan Hale, and his wife, Lena." My heart still. Attorney? Why would I need an attorney? Are they selling the house? He inhaled slowly. I could hear the hesitation in his breath. "No. They were in a boating accident during a weekend trip. I am very sorry. They did not survive." The world did not stop. It just grew impossibly quiet. My voice broke. "Both of them?" "Yes." I did not cry. Grief hit me differently. It was weight. It was pressure. It was the kind of pain that sat inside your ribcage without permission. Arthur asked to meet me the next morning. I drove to his office in silence. The steering wheel felt slippery in my hands. When I walked in, he greeted me with a gentle nod and invited me to sit. He slid a small object across his desk. A key, made of aged bronze. "This is the key to the house on Seabrook Cliff. Evan and Lena instructed that it be given to you in case of their passing." In case of their passing. No mother should ever hear those words. "I thought the house was under renovation," I whispered. Arthur hesitated. "Mrs. Hale, the house is fully furnished. It has been for years." My breath caught. "But they told me I couldn't visit." His eyes softened with something complicated, sympathy mixed with knowledge he could not yet share. "They left everything to you. The house is yours now. A house they never let me enter. A house I was forbidden from stepping inside. A house that was now suddenly mine. My first instinct was to sell it as soon as possible. What use did a 68-year-old woman have for a 3-story home by the cliffs? I imagined signing the papers, walking away, erasing the empty ache of rejection. But something inside me whispered, "Go, not to own it, not to sell it, just to finally see what you were never allowed to see." The next morning, I drove to the coast. The ocean wind slapped against the car. The sky was a sharp, hard gray. I parked, stepped out, and walked toward the front door that had once closed in my face. The key felt cold in my palm. a metallic reminder of every unanswered question. I slid it into the lock. The tumbler shifted. The door opened. What I saw inside stole the breath from my lungs. This was not a house under renovation, not even close. It was a secret so large that it shattered everything I believed about my son. And in that moment, standing inside the doorway he had always kept closed to me, I realized something. He had not been pushing me away. He had been protecting something, or someone. I left the coastal house with the door still open in my mind. The shock of that first step inside sat in my chest like a stone. You should know who is telling you this. My name is Ursula Hale, 68, retired librarian, mother of one son who learned to close doors with a smile. Before I tell you what I found in that house, I need to tell you about the quieter rooms that shaped me. Grief rarely arrives as thunder. Most days, it is a draft under a door you forgot to weatherproof. After my husband, Daniel, died from a winter illness that began as a cough and stole his breath with a kind of soft cruelty, the house became a map of small negotiations. I moved to one side of the bed. I kept his wool cardigan folded on the chair. I let the radio play the classical station he liked at low volume in the kitchen. People think you conquer loneliness with noise. I learned to meet it with ritual. Every morning at 6:45, I boiled water, set a single cup on the table, and chose my favorite object in the world. A small teal porcelain teapot with a hairline crack along the spout. Evan gave it to me when he was 8 after saving allowance for weeks. He handed it over with that fierce little boy pride that makes a mother's heart feel too big for her ribs. He had scribbled a card in pencil, "For tea when it is raining." It was raining the afternoon he gave it to me. I believed the teapot could hold weather. I still use it, chipped and stubborn. It pours a thin ribbon of heat that smells like home. That teapot became my covenant with myself. Never let bitterness poison the water. I carried it from room to room some mornings as if warmth could follow. Evan and his wife, Lena, lived an hour away along the cliffs where the road curls like handwriting. In the first year after Daniel died, they came by twice. We ate takeout at the kitchen table. We made the kind of conversation that stays at the surface because the deep part is too heavy to lift. After that, the rhythm changed. I would text that I baked lemon shortbread or apple cake. The reply would arrive with brisk politeness. "The house is under renovation. We will come to you next month. We are swamped with work. Love you. Can we send you a little extra for groceries?" Money arrived with the efficiency of a utility bill. I told myself it was how modern children showed care. I told myself I was lucky compared to people who received nothing at all. But there is a special ache when love is wired to your account instead of walking through your door. I did not ask for explanations. Librarians learn to respect silence. It is the room where people make sense of the story before they are ready to speak it. Thursdays were my baking days. I wore Daniel's cardigan and tied my apron with a double knot like a promise. I set aside a tin for Evan each week and labeled it with the date. The freezer held a row of tidy intentions. Gifts that never found their way to the person they were meant for. I do not consider it foolish. Hope needs a shelf just like flour and sugar. Neighbors invited me to church suppers. I said yes when I could, no when I could not bear the sight of couples leaning into each other to share a joke. At the senior center, I taught a knitting class. There is a dignity in hands moving. The needles made a soft click that felt like proof of life. Sometimes a new widow would sit beside me and count stitches through tears. I never told them it would be fine. I told them it would be different, and that difference could be lived. Lena called on my birthday. She has a voice that photographs well. She complimented the roses in my yard as if she had just seen them even though she had not visited since spring. She asked whether I had considered hiring help for the gutters. She mentioned that Evan was busy, but doing great. The call lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds. I wrote the time on my calendar because some part of me needed to believe measurements could contain meaning. Once late autumn, I drove toward their cul-de-sac with the cookie tin riding shotgun. I did not announce it. I simply wanted to see my son's face in the doorframe and say the simplest thing a mother can say, "I made this for you." The house looked perfect from the street. New paint, tidy hedges, a porch light that glowed like politeness. I stood there and remembered the last time I had been on that porch. The words landed like a gate. "Mom, stop coming to our house." He had said it with care, as if careful could make a blade dull. I turned the car around that day and drove home slowly, careful with the cookie tin as if broken sugar could be another kind of loss. There were people who told me to stand up for myself. "You have to demand respect," a woman in my knitting circle said, clacking her needles like swords. I nodded. I thanked her. I went home and poured tea. I believe in boundaries. I also believe love wins more battles in quiet than in court. I was waiting for a door to open from the inside. A mother cannot pick a lock without losing something vital. When January cut the air thin and sharp, the phone call from the attorney arrived, and a different sort of silence settled over my house. I made tea and sat at the table with the teapot centered like a compass. I do not remember tasting it. I do remember the weight of the key the next day, bronze, cool, indifferent to every memory I tried to drape over it. You might imagine I felt vindicated when Arthur said the house was furnished and had been for years. I did not. I felt tired the way a person feels at the end of a too long winter, ready to step outside even if the ground is still icy. I drove to Seabrook Cliff with both hands on the wheel. I spoke to Daniel as if he rode along. I told him I would be careful. I told him I would finally see our son's life as he lived it, not as I imagined it. Before I climbed out, I reached for the teapot in the passenger seat. I had brought it with me as if it were a passport. Ritual does not fix a life. It steadies the hands that must do the fixing. I set it gently back down and locked the car. The wind smelled like rain. The front steps felt steeper than they were. I will not tell you what I saw inside yet. The story deserves air to breathe. I will tell you what I heard, though. I heard the echo of a sentence that has followed me for years. It is the truest thing I know about my life and the only line I repeat to myself when words start to lie. Some houses are locked with keys. I was locked with silence, standing at that threshold, key poised. I understood the difference for the first time. A key turns when you decide to turn it. Silence ends when you speak into it with the full weight of your name. My name is Ursula. I carry a teapot that leaks in the prettiest way. I have been the extra chair at my own table, and I was about to learn why my son kept a door closed that should have been mine to enter. The lock yielded, the air shifted, the old life tilted. I stepped over the line between what I had been told and what I would finally know, holding everything steady with one hand and a lifetime of quiet with the other. The morning after I first turned the key, I met the man who had carried the news that split my life in two. His name was Arthur Keene, 62, a widower himself, quite the way people become after they have spent years watching others argue over the ruins of love. His office sat on the second floor of a weathered brick building downtown, the blinds half drawn, the smell of old paper and sea salt rising from somewhere unseen. I liked that he did not rush me. Most people talk around grief, but Arthur allowed silence to take a seat between us like an extra guest. He poured 2 cups of coffee and placed one in front of me without asking if I wanted it. "Sometimes," he said, "a warm cup reminds us that we are still in the world." The line could have sounded rehearsed, but his voice made it simple. I wrapped my hands around the mug, though my stomach had no room for anything but disbelief. He opened a folder. "Mrs. Hale, your son and his wife were sailing near Point Ridley last weekend. Their boat capsized after a sudden storm. The Coast Guard found debris early Sunday morning. They recovered Lena's body that evening. Evans was found 2 days later." Each word landed like the tick of a metronome. Precise, controlled, merciless. I felt myself nodding as if my body had been trained to move politely even while the world folded in half. I asked whether they had suffered. Arthur's eyes lowered. "It was quick," he said. Though we both knew that no one could promise such mercy, he slid another document across the desk. "I am handling the estate." The word estate felt strange in the air, too formal for the boy who once built blanket forts in our living room. "You are the only surviving relative," he continued, "but there are matters you should understand." He hesitated, then added, Most of the assets were under Lena's name. The house, vehicles, bank accounts, even the clinic shares. Your son's name appears mainly as co-signer. The statement did not offend me. It confused me. Evan had been successful, a pediatric specialist who published papers I never fully understood. But the idea that he had surrendered everything legally to his wife was new. I looked at Arthur, waiting for context. He chose his words carefully. It is not uncommon for couples to consolidate ownership for tax purposes. Still, given the arrangement, there may be delays in transferring anything to you. I heard the subtext. There might be nothing left. A mother's mind does not calculate wealth the way lawyers do, but I felt the sting of exclusion. It was not about money. It was about the invisible erasure that comes when your name vanishes from every document tied to the people you raised. Arthur must have read that on my face. Evan respected you greatly, he said. He spoke of your strength after your husband's death. He wanted to make sure you were protected. That is why there is a trust in your name, separate from everything else. It contains the Seabrook Cliff property and certain accounts he kept private. Private. The word shifted in my chest like an unanswered letter. I asked, "So Lena's family, will they be arranging the funeral?" He nodded. Her parents have already taken charge. They've scheduled a joint service for both of them this Friday. I thanked him, though the gratitude felt misplaced. On my way out, Arthur said quietly, "You should attend if you can. Closure is part of inheritance, too." I did not answer. Closure, I thought, is for doors that were ever open. The service took place at a seaside chapel built from pale wood and glass that caught the morning light. I drove there with the teal teapot wrapped in a towel on the passenger seat, not sure why I brought it. Maybe because it was the only proof of motherhood I had left. Rows of cars lined the gravel lot. Photographers stood beyond the gate. The obituary in the newspaper had described Evan and Lena as a beloved couple devoted to medical outreach. The words felt like they belonged to strangers. When I stepped inside, an usher asked, "Are you with the Monroe family?" Lena's maiden name. I shook my head. "I'm his mother." The man's expression changed. Politeness rearranged itself into caution. He guided me to the last row behind a pillar. No one from Lena's family turned around. Their grief was organized, dressed in coordinated black, polished like everything else about them. I recognized Lena's mother, Elaine, elegant, unyielding, and her father, a man whose handshake years ago had felt like a contract I was not meant to read. The caskets were identical, 2 pale boxes under a spray of lilies. Evan's photo showed him in his white coat, smiling the professional smile of someone trained to make other people comfortable. I searched for a trace of the boy I knew, the chipped tooth from baseball, the mischievous eyes, but all I saw was composure. Even in death, my son had become a public version of himself. The pastor spoke of service, compassion, and philanthropy. He mentioned Lena's foundation work, her leadership, her bright spirit. He mentioned Evan only as her partner in life and research. I waited for my name, for any acknowledgement that I existed within the architecture of their lives. It never came. When the slideshow began, every photograph featured Lena at the center, cutting ribbons, holding awards, surrounded by colleagues. Evan appeared beside her like a steady shadow. I sat perfectly still. Grief is a performance I no longer audition for. Afterward, as people filed out, Elaine approached me. Her perfume reached me before her. Voice did. "Ursula," she said, not unkindly, but with that careful tone reserved for strangers who might cry in public. "We're so sorry. Evan was such support to our daughter. We intend to preserve their work through the foundation." I asked if she needed any help with arrangements. She smiled faintly. "It's all taken care of." When she moved away, I saw a pamphlet on a nearby seat, the Ursula Hale Memorial Fund. Below the title were 6 trustees, all of them from Lena's side of the family. My name was not there. Arthur was not there. The irony almost made me laugh. Outside, the wind from the ocean carried the scent of salt and wet stone. Reporters waited at the gate, calling out questions about the charitable legacy of Dr. and Mrs. Hale. I walked past them without a word. Some women break by screaming. I break by continuing to walk. When I reached my car, I unwrapped the teapot. The crack along its spout caught the sunlight, a flaw that glittered. I whispered to the air, "You always did give everything away, didn't you?" The words did not carry anger, they carried recognition. Evan had given himself to the world and left me in silence. Back home, the key to Seabrook Cliff lay on the table where I had left it, bronze against wood, a promise I had not yet kept. I placed the teapot beside it, the two gleaming under the weak afternoon light. One held warmth, the other held secrets. I understood then that grief would not end with funerals or papers or polite condolences. It would end only when I turned that key again and faced whatever truth waited behind the door. That night, as rain pressed against the windows, I repeated a sentence that had begun to echo through every quiet room of my house. Some houses are locked with keys. I was locked with silence. Tomorrow, I will start to unlock both. The week after the funeral unfolded in the slow, mechanical rhythm of paperwork. I signed documents, nodded through condolences, and carried boxes from Arthur's office to my car as if moving cardboard could somehow move grief along with it. Each folder carried Evan's name printed in firm official typeface, a name that used to live in crayon drawings on my refrigerator. Arthur called 2 days later, his voice calm, measured. "Mrs. Hale, could you come in? There's one final item you should have in person." When I arrived, the office felt even quieter than before. Outside, gulls circled over the harbor, their cries sharp against the cold February air. Arthur gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. He had a small envelope in his hand sealed with a notary stamp. He slid it across to me. Inside was a folded note and a single bronze key attached to a short black ribbon. The metal was cool, heavier than I expected, as though it carried more than its size allowed. Arthur said softly, "This came with your son's private instructions. He left a brief message for you." I unfolded the note. The handwriting was unmistakably Evan's, precise, slightly slanted, written in blue ink. It said only 4 words, "Mom must go first." I stared at the page, waiting for more, but that was it. No signature, no explanation, just that quiet command. Arthur spoke again, careful not to intrude on my thoughts. He wanted you to visit the Seabrook Cliff property before any legal proceedings regarding its transfer. His exact words were, "My mother should see it first, and no one else." I tried to make sense of it. "He didn't explain why?" Arthur shook his head. "None that I could find. There's no mention in his files, but he was deliberate about details. I'd trust there's a reason." I held the key tighter, feeling its edges dig into my palm. Was Lena aware of this? Arthur looked uncertain. The note was in a safe deposit box under his name alone. If she was, she left no record of it. Silence stretched. I remembered the polished photos from the funeral, the way Lena's family had filled every frame while my son seemed to fade toward the background. Yet here was his handwriting, his voice, finally, just for me. Arthur added, "Take your time. There's no urgency in the legal sense, but maybe in another sense, there is." That night, I placed the key on my kitchen table beside the teal teapot. The metal glimmered under the yellow light, catching shadows like a mirror. I turned the note over in my hands, reading the words until they began to blur. Mom must go first. It sounded less like instruction and more like permission. I boiled water and poured tea slowly, the way I always did when the house felt too large. The steam curled upward, touching the edge of the key as if trying to bless it. I thought of Evan at 8 years old, sitting on the counter with flour on his nose, asking me if I thought he could build a robot to do homework for him. He'd always been curious, bright, a little too earnest for his own comfort. I wondered if that same earnestness had led him to whatever truth this house now contained. The next morning, I packed a small overnight bag. I tucked the note and the teapot inside, wrapped carefully in a towel. The sky outside was the color of pewter, heavy with rain. I locked the front door and stood still for a moment, realizing that for the first time in years, I was leaving not to visit, but to be the one visiting his world. The drive to Seabrook Cliff took nearly 2 hours along a road that curved through forest and farmland before meeting the ocean. I drove without music, the windshield wipers marking time against the silence. Each flash of light through the trees pulled memories to the surface. Evan at 6, chasing kites across a field. Evan at 16, arguing with his father about curfews. Evan at 20, leaving for medical school with a suitcase too big for his body. At one point, I passed the diner we used to stop at during those drives to college. I could almost hear him laughing at the terrible jukebox songs, insisting on ordering pie even when he was late for class. The memory pressed against me, sweet and cruel. When the coastline appeared, mist rising from the cliffs, I slowed. The road narrowed into a single lane lined with cypress trees leaning inward as though guarding secrets. My hands tightened on the wheel. The GPS announced the final turn, but I already knew it was close. I could feel the hum beneath my ribs. The house came into view, pale stone, tall windows, its roof slanted toward the sea. The same house I had stood before years earlier, told not to enter. Only now the gate hung slightly open. I parked on the gravel drive and sat there for several minutes, the engine idling. Rain began to fall, steady and deliberate. The sound filled the car like static. I reached into my bag and took out the teapot, setting it in my lap. I whispered, "Well, Evan, I'm here." The words shook more than I wanted them to. I opened the door. The wind carried the salt smell of the ocean, cold and raw. The path to the porch was overgrown with damp grass, and the wood steps creaked under my weight. Every sensory detail pressed itself into memory. The grain of the railing, the faint hum of the sea below, the rhythm of rain on the roof. I slipped the key into the lock. It resisted for a second, then turned with a low, metallic sigh. I pushed the door open. Inside was dim light, the faint scent of cedar, and something unfamiliar like antiseptic or old paper. The air felt still, but not abandoned. I stayed in the doorway, not ready to move further. I could hear the echo of my own breath. A memory rose unbidden. Evan at 12, standing at the doorway of his father's study after being scolded for breaking a vase. He had whispered, "Dad, I just wanted to look." The same tone lived in me now. Curiosity edged with guilt. I crossed the threshold, one slow step at a time. My fingers brushed the wall. Dust clung to my skin. The hallway opened into a living room, faint light filtering through sheer curtains. Nothing was out of place, yet something was off. There were no family photographs, no trace of warmth, only order. The storm outside deepened, waves striking the cliffs below. I thought about Arthur's words, "Trust the reason." Maybe this was the beginning of it. I placed the teapot on the nearest table like a token, grounding myself in something known. The key rested beside it, glinting under the muted light. "You told me to come first," I said quietly into the empty air. "I'm here now. Show me what you couldn't tell me." The house answered only with silence, but in that silence I sensed movement, the kind that comes before revelation, the kind that waits for courage. I closed the door behind me. The latch clicked, soft but final. The sea roared somewhere beyond the walls, and I realized I was no longer locked out. This time, I was the one holding the key. The first thing I noticed was what I did. Not notice. No plastic sheeting, no ladders leaned against walls, no sharp scent of fresh paint or the chalky grit of drywall dust underfoot. The entryway shone as if a careful hand had polished every surface that morning. The wood floor reflected the gray light in thin rivers. I stood still and let my eyes adjust. Renovation leaves a kind of noise even when the workmen are gone. This house held none of it. I set the teal teapot on a console table and slipped the bronze key beside it. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something medicinal, like a closet where someone stored bandages and rubbing alcohol. To my left, a living room opened with precise symmetry. 2 chairs angled toward a low table, a sofa that looked new enough to squeak, a rug centered so perfectly it seemed measured with string. Everything matched. Nothing belonged. I moved forward carefully, a librarian in a strange archive. Books lined one wall, arranged not by genre or affection, but by height. The spines rose and fell like a city skyline. I reached for a volume I knew, a collection of ocean essays, and found its pages uncut. The knife of a reader had never kissed them. The book had been placed to be seen, not held. A bowl sat on the coffee table with 4 green apples, each unblemished. I lifted one and felt the exact wax of a grocery store shine. It was too perfect to be true and therefore not true at all. The kitchen waited beyond a sliding door. Stainless steel gleamed, white counters shone, not a teaspoon out of place. I opened a drawer. Every utensil lay in a straight row. The pantry offered neat rows of canned soup facing forward like obedient soldiers. All the expiration dates matched, as if someone had filled a cart in a single afternoon and never returned. The refrigerator hummed with the soft discipline of new machines. Inside were bottled water, 2 cartons of eggs, a sealed jug of milk that would expire next week, nothing more. I searched for a half-open jar, a forgotten wedge of cheese, the crumbs and fingerprints of an ordinary life. I found only absence. Married houses reveal themselves most honestly in bathrooms. I checked the one off the hall. 2 fresh towels folded with hotel corners, a bar of soap unwrapped but unused, an electric toothbrush in the charger with a single head, no makeup bag on the counter, no hair caught in the drain. I opened the medicine cabinet and found travel-sized items duplicated in pairs that had never been opened. My reflection in the mirrored door looked like a woman trespassing in a furniture showroom. Back in the hall, I paused to listen. Old houses breathe, they sigh in rafters and talk in pipes. This one held its breath. The silence had weight. It pushed lightly against the ears the way a storm does when it is still deciding whether to grow. I kept moving because stopping felt like surrender. The master bedroom faced the sea through long windows veiled with gauze curtains. A king bed stretched immaculate, the duvet smooth, pillows arranged in a regimented row. I leaned over and placed my hand flat, feeling for the shallow dip that bodies leave even after a careful smoothing. The mattress gave and sprang back untouched. On one nightstand, a digital clock glowed 12 as if the power had flickered and no one cared to reset it. On the other, a lamp and nothing else. I opened the closet and found a row of clothes that told no story. Dress shirts in 3 shades of blue, slacks in 2 shades of gray, no casual sweaters, no bright tie that betrayed a mood, no floral dress with a hem coming loose, no winter boots with salt scars. The space smelled faintly of cedar blocks rather than people. I checked the drawers, socks rolled as if by a catalog, underwear still folded with the shop creases. In a shallow tray, a watch I had never seen, elegant, expensive, thin as a promise. I pressed the button and the face lit with today's date, correct to the minute. Someone had tended to the watch, but not the room. The contradiction pricked me like a burr. I walked to the upstairs hall. One door opened to a guest room so pristine it might have been arranged for a photograph. Another opened to a small office with a desk and an empty blotter. The drawers held brand new legal pads, unused pens, a stapler that had never pierced paper, no computer, no printer, a power strip on the floor with nothing plugged into it. The window overlooked the drive. From that angle, the teapot on the console was visible as a small, stubborn dot of color. I took comfort in its ordinary defiance. I stood in the doorway and tried to imagine Evan here. I pictured him shrugging off his coat, dropping a bag, calling out to Lena about a patient or a headline or the need to fix a dripping tap. Houses hold the echoes of small habits. Coasters show water rings. Floors show the pattern of pacing. Cushions show the place one person always sat. I could not find even a faint signature of the two of them together. A house can be private without being blank. This one was blank. Downstairs again, I noticed the photographs on the entry wall. They were art, not family. Black and white seascapes, framed in white, evenly spaced. No wedding pictures. No childhood snapshots. No messy refrigerator magnets with crooked spelling. Even the bulletin board near the garage entry held nothing but 2 pushpins and an index card with the Wi-Fi password handwritten in Lena's careful script. I recognized her L. 2 flourishes like wings. The name of the network was a joke about waves. When I read it, I felt a pang I had not expected. I had wanted to be angry with her at the funeral, Anger is easier to lift than grief. But the truth of this house did not look like betrayal. It looked like an absence arranged with precision. I returned to the living room and sat. The sofa accepted me with a faint sigh, as if grateful for any weight at all. Through the window, the horizon lay in a hard silver line, the sea bruised and beautiful. I said Evan's name out loud, not for effect, just to see how it sounded in this space. The air did not change. I tried again, softer. Names are keys. They turn locks we cannot see. This lock did not turn. A clock somewhere ticked. The sound grew louder now that I had stopped moving. Tick to mark the minute. Tick to underline the quiet. I let the sound carry me into memory because memory at least had texture. Evan on a Saturday morning wrestling the garden hose like a serpent. Evan at 12 reorganizing the pantry by food groups because he had read an article on efficiency. Evan at 28 bringing Lena over for the first time and glancing at me to gauge whether my smile was big enough. Each image rose and faded against the stillness until the contrast made me shiver. I stood again, restless. At the base of the stairs, a small scuff on the wall caught my eye, the kind of mark a suitcase leaves when someone misjudges a corner. I traced it with my thumb, relieved to find a flaw that belonged to life rather than staging. In the laundry room, a single basket sat empty. The washer door stood open as if waiting to air out. The lint trap was clean. No forgotten sock, no perfume ghosting from a sweater sleeve. The house pretended to have been used. It had not been lived in. I told myself there might be a locked room, a private corner, a drawer where love had been tucked away out of sight. I returned to the console table and lifted the teapot. Its familiar weight steadied me. I poured water from my thermos, a small act of occupation. Steam rose and wrapped my face in comfort. It occurred to me that if I washed a cup here and left it to dry with a water spot, I would make the first human mark this room had seen in months. The urge felt rebellious, then sad. As I sipped, the question that had been circling finally landed. If Evan had kept me out to protect something, where was the sign of that something? If Lena had insisted the house was under renovation, what story required a lie so clean it bleached every trace of them? I set the cup down. The quiet felt colder now, almost deliberate. Not neglect, not chaos, certainty. I picked up the key once more and weighed it in my palm. I could hear the ocean pressing against the cliff as if to remind me that patience can be violent. "Something is wrong," I said, and the words felt like the first honest things spoken in that house. The moment I named it, the room sharpened, the silence no longer muting but ringing. When I turned toward the hallway again, I noticed an almost invisible seam in the wall beyond the office door, the faintest line where paint met paint, with a difference you felt more than saw. I walked toward it as the house kept its counsel, every clean surface reflecting me back as if to ask whether I was ready to see what I had come to see. The line in the wall would have gone unnoticed by anyone not trained to love books. Years in libraries teach you to see what tries to stay hidden. The faint seam of a misplaced spine, the whisper of a page turned out of rhythm. I traced that seam now, feeling the brush of paint under my fingertips. It wasn't a crack, it was deliberate. A narrow door, flush with the paneling, disguised by precision. My pulse quickened in that quiet way age doesn't protect you from. I found the handle, nearly invisible, a recessed oval of cold brass. When I pressed, the latch clicked. The sound was small, but absolute. The kind that tells you you're about to change something by opening it. The door creaked inward, revealing a narrow staircase descending into dim light. The air was cooler there, tinged with the smell of paper and salt. I hesitated, then took the first step. The stair treads were smooth, well used. My hands skimmed the wall, feeling faint indentations where fingertips had brushed often. Someone had come here regularly. Someone had needed this space. At the bottom, I found a small room lit by a single bulb in a wire cage. It wasn't a cellar exactly, more like a study that had forgotten to introduce itself to the rest of the house. A desk sat beneath a corkboard pinned with papers, notes, and photographs. Shelves lined one wall, filled not with books this time, but binders, neatly labeled. The air hummed faintly from a portable heater in the corner. I moved closer. The first thing I saw were photographs, children, dozens of them, some smiling shyly, some holding handmade cards. Each picture had a name scrawled in black marker: Leo, Mira, Jaden, Eli. My breath caught when I realized what the cards said in uneven handwriting. "Thank you, Dr. Hale. My son, my Evan, the boy who had once collected injured birds and tried to nurse them with eyedroppers of sugar water. He had brought that tenderness here." I sat in the wooden chair and began to study the board. There were letters, too, some typed, some written in looping cursive. One began, "You don't know what you did for us. Leo sleeps through the night now. He laughs again. You gave him back his childhood." Another said simply, "You believed me when no one else did." My eyes blurred as I read. Each note told a story I hadn't known existed. Evan hadn't just treated children, he had saved them. From homes where pain hid behind polite curtains. From systems that forgot them. Some letters were from mothers, some from social workers, one from a police officer who wrote, "Without your testimony, the case would have been buried." The names began to blend into a chorus of gratitude, and then I saw one envelope different from the rest. Tucked in the corner, newer, the paper still crisp. It was addressed simply, "To Dr. Hale, from Grace." I unfolded it. The handwriting was careful but unsteady, as if written by someone trying to be strong while still trembling. "Dear Dr. Hale, I don't know how to thank you. When you came to the hospital that night, I thought you were just another doctor doing rounds. You sat on the floor with my son when he wouldn't speak. You didn't ask him questions, just gave him the stethoscope and let him listen to your heartbeat. He smiled for the first time in months. When the truth came out about what his stepfather had done, you stayed after every appointment, helping me find a shelter. You told me not to apologize for surviving. I am still trying to believe you. I'll never forget what you said before we left. A child's silence isn't peace. It's protection. You gave us both a second chance. If you ever need anything, please write. I mean it. Grace M." I read it twice. Grace. A simple name, but it held weight now. The letter wasn't dated far back, just 2 years ago. I tried to recall if Evan had ever mentioned a case like that, but he rarely spoke about work. He'd once said, "Mom, the hardest part is pretending I'm just a doctor when I'm standing between a child and the world." I hadn't understood until this moment how literal that was. I turned the letter over. A small photograph was taped to the back. A boy about 7, his arm around a golden retriever. His grin was missing one front tooth. In the background stood a playground, sunlight spilling through swings. Written beneath, "Leo, age 7. Leo, Grace's son." My throat tightened. This room, this secret, was it for them? Was this where he planned his advocacy work, away from the hospital? Away from scrutiny? Perhaps even away from Lena? I opened one of the binders. Inside were case summaries. Dates, initials, observations. Not medical charts, but field notes. MP, age 9, confirmed neglect. CPS notified. JD, age 12, severe anxiety, awaiting foster placement. LH, age 7, domestic abuse. Mother, Grace M., relocation complete. Every page documented not just illness, but courage. And in the margins, Evan's handwriting again. Keep it quiet until safe. Follow up personally. Trust only Grace. I whispered the words aloud. Trust only Grace. The name echoed through the small room as if it belonged here. I thought of Lena's polite smile, her controlled life. Would she have known about this? Would she have approved? A foundation wife, careful with image. Could she have understood that her husband ran a parallel practice, one not of medicine but mercy? The idea unsettled me because it forced me to see him not as the distant son who'd pushed me away, but as someone carrying burdens too dangerous to share. The perfection of the house made new sense. It wasn't an absence. It was a disguise. A sanctuary disguised as a home. On the desk, under the lamp, lay another object, a leather notebook, corners worn smooth. I opened it, expecting numbers, dates. Instead, I found thoughts, half reflections, half confessions. If I tell her, she'll worry. If I don't, she'll never know who I really am. Some silences are a kindness. Others are in a cage. I didn't know whether her meant Lena or me, but every sentence pulsed with conflict. Can good intentions survive secrecy? How many lies make a truth? It was Evan's handwriting, and it read like a dialogue with himself. I looked up from the pages to the photographs around me. Dozens of children, smiling at a man who had seen their pain without turning away. My son had lived in the moral gray, not the polished white of hospital halls. He had been a doctor, a witness, and maybe something closer to a savior than I had ever realized. I thought about the funeral again, the speeches about philanthropy, the absence of his name in the foundation, the deliberate omission of who he really was. They had buried his image, but not his work. His truth had waited here behind a painted seam. The silence in the room softened, changed. It was no longer the sterile quiet of emptiness. It was reverent, as if the walls themselves were holding breath in respect. I reached for the photo of the boy named Leo and placed it on the desk beside the teapot I had carried down with me. The two looked oddly fitting together, compassion and continuity. As I sat there, I realized how wrong I had been about silence. It wasn't always a wound. Sometimes it was a vault, guarding the sacred until someone worthy came to open it. Evan had locked this place not to shut me out, but to keep others safe. Still, one question pressed against the peace beginning to form. Where was Grace now? And why had Evan's final words to me been, "Mom must go first"? I closed the notebook gently. The heater's hum filled the room again, steady as a heartbeat. I whispered into the half-dark, "I see you, Evan. I see what you did." Then, for the first time since he died, I let myself cry. Not from loss, but from pride too sharp to hold. I stayed in the hidden study until the air turned heavy and the light from the bulb began to buzz. It wasn't fear that held me there. It was the strange peace that follows shock. I kept thinking of Grace and her boy, of all those children whose photographs lined the walls. Each smile was a secret my son had guarded, each letter a confession he had never spoken aloud. But there was something unfinished. The silence still felt too measured, as if the house had not yet told me everything. I climbed the stairs again, carrying Evan's notebook against my chest. The ocean had darkened outside the windows. The tide was climbing the rocks with slow fury. In the upstairs hallway, the faint seam I had missed earlier caught the edge of my flashlight. Another door, this one smaller, disguised as part of the wainscoting. The knob resisted, then turned. Inside lay what I first took to be an empty closet. The beam of light cut through dust motes, revealing rows of folded blankets, stacks of children's clothes sorted by size, shoes lined in pairs along the floor. I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of detergent and crayons. On the shelf above the blankets sat a row of stuffed animals. Bears, rabbits, a worn turtle whose seam had been stitched with red thread. Not for decoration, for comfort. These were things meant to be used. A soft gasp escaped me. I turned slowly, scanning the walls. Hooks held small backpacks, each tagged with a name written in marker. Leo, Mira, Joey. The same names I had seen in the letters downstairs. I pulled open one of the bags. Inside was a coloring book, half filled, and a folded note written in a child's hand. "Thank you for the pancakes." My throat closed. This wasn't storage. It was a sanctuary. The pieces began to connect. The blank perfection of the house, the untouched rooms, the false story of renovation. This wasn't a home for two adults. It was a shelter, quiet and invisible, hidden in plain sight, a place where children could stay for a night or a week while the world figured out what to do with them. I could almost hear Evan's voice explaining it. If no one knows they're here, no one can find them. I sat on the floor, dizzy from revelation and love in equal measure. How had he built this life without anyone noticing? How had Lena, elegant, careful Lena, agreed to it? Perhaps she hadn't. Perhaps this was his private rebellion, a way of breaking the chain of silence that had strangled our family for generations. I rose slowly, running my fingers along the row of coats hung on tiny hangers. Some were new, others gently used, washed and mended. At the back of the closet, almost hidden behind a stack of folded sheets, I saw an envelope taped to the wall. My name was written across it. I tore it free, careful not to rip the paper. Inside was a letter, written in the same steady handwriting I had known all my life. Mom, if you're reading this, you found what I could never explain. I didn't want to lie to you, but some truths ask to be earned, not given. Lena helped me for a while, but it became too much for her. The secrecy, the fear of losing her license, the constant risk. She wanted safety. I wanted purpose. We drifted apart in silence because I couldn't stop. These children come from places no one wants to look at. I couldn't stand by knowing I had the means to help. I registered the house under her name to protect the shelter. If anyone came asking, she could say it was ours alone. The lies were for their safety, not mine. You taught me kindness when we had nothing. You taught me that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. You once said my father left us because he didn't know how to stay. I promised myself I'd never do that to anyone again. I will never abandon children the way he abandoned you. If this house ever needs to end it on your terms. But if you can, keep the door open for them. Mom must go first. Not because I doubt you, but because I trust only you to see this place for what it is. E. The letter trembled in my hands. My knees gave way, and I sank onto the floor surrounded by evidence of his quiet heroism. The tiny shoes, the folded clothes, the stuffed turtle, each one a testimony that the boy I raised had not only grown into a man, but into a refuge. Tears came, hot and unbidden. I pressed the letter against my heart and whispered, "You didn't shut me out, you were saving them." The house seemed to breathe again, its silence gentler now, filled with echoes of children's laughter I could almost hear. I turned the flashlight toward the corner. A small chest sat beneath the coats. Inside were children's drawings, crayon portraits of a tall man in a white coat and a smiling woman with long hair. Beneath one, a note scrawled in blue marker, "Dr. Evans says monsters can't live near the ocean because salt keeps them away." I smiled through tears. He had even rewritten fear into mythology. I stood, holding his letter, and looked around one last time. The space felt sacred, not haunted. It wasn't a secret built from shame, but from mercy. The lie of renovation had been a shield, a way to hide goodness in a world that would misunderstand it. When I stepped back into the hallway, the rain had stopped. The sea roared below the cliffs, steady as a heartbeat. I closed the door to the closet carefully, the latch clicking like the soft closing of a prayer. Downstairs, I placed Evan's letter beside the teapot. Two relics of love, one fragile, one unbreakable. The bronze key lay between them, glinting in the dim light. I realized I had never truly lost my son. He had built something larger than himself, something worth protecting even now. Outside, dawn began to edge the horizon. The sky bruised into pale blue. I opened a window, letting the cold air fill the room. "Somewhere," a gull cried. For the first time since his death, I felt warmth in my chest that wasn't grief. It was understanding. I whispered to the sea, "You kept your promise, Evan. You didn't leave anyone behind." The silence that answered was not empty. It was full of everything he'd left behind, kindness, defiance, and a legacy written in small hands and brave hearts. I folded the letter back into its envelope and pressed it against the teapot's curve. In that quiet morning light, I understood why he'd wanted me to come first. Not to mourn him, but to see him clearly. To see that love, even when hidden, still leaves the door unlocked for those who need it most. Morning thinned the darkness into a gray wash that made the house feel less like a museum and more like a held breath. I brewed tea on the immaculate stove, then carried the cup back to the hidden study. The little heater ticked as it warmed, and the corkboard of letters looked almost friendly in daylight. I meant to reread Evan's notebook. Instead, my eye caught a metallic glint, half-tucked beneath a stack of binders. A small black device lay there, no larger than my palm, with a row of tiny ports and a red light waiting to wake. It was a DVR, the kind connected to security cameras. My stomach tightened. Relief. And dread arrived holding the same hand. Behind the desk, a narrow cabinet door hid a tangle of cables and a modem. 4 camera feeds were labeled in neat handwriting on tape. Front walk, driveway, back stairs, mudroom. One more label sat beneath the ports, written in a different pen. Safe room. I had not found any room that deserved the name. I powered the unit with trembling fingers. The monitor on the desk flickered alive and offered a menu of dates. The list stretched back 18 months, with clusters of recordings on stormy nights and weekends. I chose one at random from spring. The screen resolved into the front walk under sodium porch light, the pathway slick with rain. Evan appeared, hood up, arm extended, ushering a boy of about 9 whose backpack hung off one shoulder. The child hesitated. Evan knelt to eye level and held out his hand. The boy took it. A minute later, a car idled at the curb. The silhouette of a man stepped out, wide-shouldered, movement tight as wire. He paced at the gate and then came forward, shouting words the camera could not record, but the body could. Evan stood between the man and the boy, still kneeling as if refusing to rise to the man's height. He pointed to the street, then back to the car. The man jabbed a finger toward the boy, then toward the house. Evan did not move a simple. The boy pressed closer to him, small hands fisted in the fabric of Evan's coat. It ended only when headlights swept the street and another vehicle rolled to a stop. A woman I recognized from a letter stepped out with a social worker's lanyard. Papers were presented. A phone was held up. The man sagged into rage and retreat. The boy never left Evan's side. I paused the frame and leaned closer. The look on my son's face had nothing performative in it. It was concentrated tenderness mixed with a resolve I had seldom seen in him as a child. He had always been gentle. Here he was, also unbreakable. I clicked forward to another night. Different child, different hour. The driveway camera captured Evan emerging from the driver's seat. A girl wrapped in his coat, her knees muddy, hair matted in clumps. He lifted her with a care that felt almost ceremonial and carried her toward the mudroom. He did not look back once. I let the footage run, not to punish myself with every rescue, but to understand the rhythm of this place. He kept the porch lights low and the motions spare. He moved as someone trained to be seen as little as possible. Twice a patrol car crawled past on the road. Twice his body stilled at the sound before relaxing when it did not turn in. The house's blankness made elegant sense now. He had built a life that could be inspected by anyone at any time without betraying the kids who had slept under its roof. Order was camouflage. I scrolled further down the dates and found a folder flagged with a star. The title was plain, May. I opened it. The mudroom camera blinked to life and showed Evan at the sink. Blood from his knuckles. Lena stood in the doorway, coat on, purse strapped tight across her shoulder. She spoke. He answered without turning. She stepped closer, reached to touch his arm, then tucked her hand back against her side as if burned by second thoughts. The recording had no audio, but you could read the conversation in their bodies. She pointed toward the front door, then toward the ceiling, then at him. He shook his head once, slow, not angry, simply finished with arguing. She placed both hands on the counter and leaned in with that poised determination I had admired and resented. He dried his hands. The paper towel went to the bin with surgical precision. She reached for his face. He flinched, not from fear, but from the urgency of listening. Voices carry, even when muted. Then the door to the back stairs opened and a teenage boy stood there in an oversized sweatshirt. He saw the tension and froze. Evan turned instantly, everything in him softening. He pointed up, palm steady, and the boy retreated, closing the door carefully. When Evan faced Lena again, his expression had changed. He did not argue now. He gestured to the cabinets, the stove, the stacked groceries. He was showing her the work, the systems, the safety. She shook her head once. Her lips pressed into a practiced line. He reached for her hand. She let him. Then she pulled away. The clip ended with her walking out into the rain and him standing still, hand on the edge of the sink as if holding on to the house so he would not shatter. I sat back hard. People imagine marriage breaks like glass. More often it erodes like a coastline. You wake up to find the path you once walked together has crumbled into the sea, and the only way forward requires a jump someone cannot make. I watched 2 more videos from that month. In one, Lena returned with 2 large duffel bags, dropped them at the threshold, and left again without crossing it. Evan opened the bags, clothes for children, new sneakers still tied together by plastic. She did not approve, but she still supplied. That knowledge softened something sharp in me. The last starred clip made me press a hand to my mouth. The front walk camera showed a man I recognized from earlier footage trying the gate, then hopping it. He strode toward the door with the confidence of a bully who has never been stopped. Evan stepped out before he could knock. The movement was fast but deliberate. He planted himself, palms open. The man shoved. Evan absorbed it and did not give ground. 2 silhouettes appeared behind the frosted glass, small and close. The man lunged. Evan hooked him by the elbow and turned the force back, guiding him off the step. Not striking, only redirecting. It was the gentlest version of self-defense and somehow the most devastating. The man landed in wet grass, humiliated. Evan pointed to the gate. The man hurled a final insult, then fled to a car that peeled away too fast. The recording ended with Evan leaning his forehead against the door for a long moment before squaring himself and going back inside. I felt a complicated ache take root under my ribs. He had been fighting a quiet war and never called me once. I thought of all the times I rang and got a text instead, the polite deferrals, the schedule excuses, the blank holiday weekends I filled with knitting and church potlucks and a teapot I treated like a companion. The realization rose like a tide I could not outrun. He did not keep me away to shut me out. He kept me away to keep me safe. If a man could hop a gate for a child he claimed to own, what would he do when a mother stood in his way? Fear becomes a simple geometry when you have loved someone who left. You draw smaller circles around what you can still protect. My son had drawn one around me. Guilt arrived with the understanding. I had spent 4 years nursing a quiet resentment that he had chosen Lena and worked over me. Yet here he was, choosing the dangerous good over the easy love and shielding me from the cost of that choice. I set my tea aside and pressed my palms to my eyes until stars burst behind them. When the sparkles faded, the house felt different again. Not cold, not blank, consecrated. I clicked through a few final files, less from morbid curiosity than from a need to bear witness. In one, Lena stood by the stove stirring a pot, while a girl perched on a stool peeled carrots. You could see the girl asking a question and Lena answering with a rueful half-smile. They were not enemies. They were misaligned. In another, Evan sat on the mudroom floor tying a shoelace, his fingers moving with the patience of someone who understands that a knot can be a lesson. That was my boy. I turned off the monitor and let the room settle. I thought of Arthur's careful eyes, of Elaine's spotless grief, of the way foundations can launder a narrative until the truth is bleached out. I thought of the letter in my pocket where Evan wrote he would never abandon children the way his father abandoned me. The line pierced and healed in the same motion. I said it aloud because saying makes shape. You stayed. You stayed for them, and you left me at the edge of it so I could keep standing. The sentence steadied me. It also accused. Love that saves can still wreck a marriage. Duty that protects can still break a mother's heart. The ocean hammered the cliffs. I listened and let its rhythm teach me a slower kind of breath. The camera's red light went to sleep. I closed the cabinet and slid the chair under the desk as if returning a book to its shelf. Some houses are locked with keys, some with silence, some with purpose so fierce it can look like cruelty from the outside. I had lived long enough to understand the difference. Now that I did, I knew I could not leave this story hidden where only a red light remembered it. I stayed in the hidden office until afternoon. The air felt different now. Not haunted, not sterile, full. as though every wall carried breath. I walked slowly back up the stairs, passing the closet of tiny coats, the shelf of stuffed animals, the names written in marker. I paused to touch the one labeled Leo, tracing each letter with my thumb. "If I had known," I whispered, "I would have helped you." But even as I said it, another truth pressed back. Knowing might have put those children at risk. I returned to the living room and sank into the sofa. The ocean beyond the window churned under a darkening sky. The teapot rested on the table next to Evan's letter and the key. 3 symbols of 3 versions of love: motherly, sacrificial, and unfinished. That was when headlights swept across the wall. I startled, reflexive fear. But then Arthur stepped into view through the window. I hadn't called him, yet he had come. He knocked once and waited, hat in hand, gentle as always. I opened the door. "Mrs. Hale," he said with a soft nod. "You didn't answer your phone. I got worried." "My phone?" I patted my pockets and realized it was still downstairs in the hidden room. "I drove by because I had a feeling you might be here." His voice held something more than concern, something like responsibility. I stepped aside to let him in. His gaze moved slowly across the room, the perfect furniture, the silent order. He didn't comment on the emptiness. He understood it instantly. "I know," he murmured. We sat across from each other. For a while, we said nothing. Silence has its own language when 2 people finally stop pretending. "I found the study," I said at last. Arthur closed his eyes as if bracing for a wave. "Then you know what he was doing." "He helped them," I whispered. "All those children. He put himself between them and danger, and he never told me." Arthur leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees. "He didn't want to pull you into the consequences." "Consequences," I repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. He nodded toward the hallway. "You saw the cameras?" "Yes." "And the footage?" I swallowed hard. "I saw enough." He sat back, exhaling slowly. "Evan came to me 2 years ago. He asked for legal advice on creating a temporary refuge for minors without triggering automatic involvement of the child welfare system." "You helped him?" Arthur gave a sad smile. "I told him it was impossible, legally impossible. If a child enters a private residence under threat, the law requires immediate reporting. There are chains of custody, mandatory disclosures, liability concerns." I cut him off. He didn't care about liability. "No," Arthur said quietly. "He cared about children slipping through the cracks." He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He wasn't naive. He understood exactly how dangerous it was. Dangerous for the children, but also dangerous for him. There were parents who would rather destroy a man than admit to abuse. My breath caught. "That's why he kept me away." Arthur met my eyes. "Yes." I felt the truth land inside me. Slow, heavy, impossible to deny. Evan didn't distance himself because he was ashamed of me. He distanced himself to keep me safe from what loved him. A tear slipped free, not from pain, but understanding. Arthur continued. "He told me this house couldn't have anyone connected to him emotionally. If anyone investigated, a mother visiting often, asking questions, that alone could compromise the children. So he lied. He lied to protect me," I whispered. Arthur nodded. He once said something that stayed with me. He said, "Some people think love means sharing everything, but sometimes love means shielding someone from the truth." I closed my eyes, letting the ache settle into something softer. There are loves that hide, not because they are weak, but because exposure would destroy the person they protect. Arthur leaned deeper into his chair. He asked me how to structure ownership so Lena's name shielded the property. He didn't want her deeply involved at first, but eventually she agreed, reluctantly. It strained their marriage. They were living 2 truths under the same roof. "That part," I murmured, "I saw." He didn't ask how. I didn't tell him about the silent footage of their fights. Some stories belong only to the people who lived them. "Mrs. Hale," Arthur said gently, Your son was doing something morally right and legally dangerous. He couldn't afford for you to know. You're too honest, too visible. You would have asked questions, made noise. Your love would have exposed the whole operation. Silence pressed around us again. Not heavy, respectful. Arthur's voice softened. He didn't keep you out because you were unimportant. He kept you out because you mattered too much. The sentence hit the deepest scar in me, diffused it, made something tight inside finally unclench. All these years I thought I was forgotten, but I had been held aside, protected. I looked down at the letter Evan had written, the ink slightly smudged from my fingers. His words replayed in my mind. Mom must go first. Now I understand. He knew I would see what others couldn't. He trusted me not just with the truth, but with the continuation of it. Arthur stood and walked toward the window. For a moment, rain hit the glass like fingertips. Then he said the sentence that unlocked every door in my heart. There are loves that must be hidden to keep someone else safe. I repeated it in a breath, barely audible. There are loves that must be hidden to keep someone else safe. A thematic echo. A truth I had lived without ever naming. Arthur turned back toward me. Your son loved you, Ursula, so fiercely that secrecy became his only language for it. My hand covered my mouth as a sob rose. Not grief, not regret, but release. I let myself feel it. Let the wave break. When I finally spoke, my voice shook. I spent years thinking he shut the door on me. No, Arthur replied. He was standing on the other side of the door, keeping danger from getting through. We sat again. The sea hammered the cliffs like applause. I don't know what to do next, I said truthfully. He studied me, the teapot, the envelopes, the key. You decide what this house becomes. Outside, thunder rolled, low and steady. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe the story of this house didn't end with Evan. Maybe I had been brought here not to close a door, but to open one. Arthur reached for his coat. Whatever you choose, I'll stand behind you. He left me with a quiet dignity that matched the house. I placed my hand on Evan's letter one more time. I wasn't pushed away. I whispered to the empty room. I was protected. The following week moved with the strange slowness of suspense. I cleaned rooms that were already clean. I brewed tea I didn't drink. Every sound in the house, wind under the eaves, the distant crack of waves, felt amplified. Still, I refused to leave. I owed Evan that much. The truth wasn't meant to die locked behind polished walls. Arthur called once to check in. Any trouble? He asked. None, I said. But even as I spoke, I caught a flicker of motion outside the window, a car idling by the gate before pulling away. I dismissed it as paranoia. The mind learns new shapes for fear once it knows what it's protecting. That night, rain swept in from the sea. Around midnight, I heard tires on the gravel drive. The house lights glowed against the dark like a quiet declaration of presence. I moved toward the door, heartbeat steady but deliberate. The knock came. 3 sharp raps, the kind that announced intention rather than request. I opened the door only halfway. A man stood there beneath the porch light, his coat soaked through, water dripping from his cuffs. He was tall, broad, built like someone who expected obedience. His face carried that practiced smirk of men used to being feared. Mrs. Hale, he said, you don't know me, but I know you. His voice was smooth and low, the kind that coiled rather than struck. May I ask who you are? I said. My name's Victor Sloan. He leaned against the doorframe as if it were his. You've got something that belongs to me. I did not move. I don't believe I do. Oh, but you do. His eyes flicked past me into the hall. My boy was here. You know who I mean. I saw the pictures all over the news when your son died, the saintly doctor. You really think I wouldn't notice one of those little faces in the background of a police report? Leo. That's his name. My chest went cold. Leo isn't here. He smiled. Maybe not now, but he was. You're sitting on private property that was used for kidnapping. I have every right to walk in there and find proof. I let the door open just enough for his reflection to catch the hallway light. You're mistaken. This house was a refuge. No one was kidnapped. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. Refuge? Is that what you people call it? Harboring a minor, lying to the authorities? Your son broke the law, lady, and from what I hear, he didn't make it out to answer for it. I felt my stomach twist, but kept my voice calm. You should leave. He took a step forward, his boots scraping the threshold. You don't want trouble, Mrs. Hale. I'm not here to hurt you, I just want to see what's inside, and between us, you don't have anyone left to protect you. The sentence hung in the air, deliberate, poisonous. You don't have anyone left. I met his gaze. I didn't speak. Silence, I had learned, can be sharper than any word. It unsettled him. He expected pleading or outrage. Instead, he got nothing. I watched the small flicker in his eyes, the moment he realized he was standing in a house that did not fear him. He tried again. You think your son was a hero. He wasn't. He interfered in other people's lives. My family's business is none of yours, none of his. You know what happens when you play savior? People get hurt. He stepped closer, close enough that the smell of wet leather and cigarette smoke mixed with rain. And now you're alone here, pretending you can carry on his fantasy. You're what? 68? You really think anyone's coming if you scream? I still didn't move. My pulse beat steady, my breath slow. I let the silence widen until it felt like a wall between us. The sea roared beneath the cliffs as if answering for me. Get off the property, I said finally, my voice calm, almost gentle. Now, he smirked. Or what? I tilted my head slightly toward the small camera mounted above the porch, the one I'd found reconnected from Evan's system. You're being recorded. Every second. And Arthur Keene, my attorney, receives automatic footage when the sensor detects movement after dark. His expression faltered, just slightly, but enough. Lying, are you? He said. I smiled faintly. Try me. We stood like that, rain falling between us, his breath visible in small bursts. He wanted me to flinch. When I didn't, the smirk collapsed into something more primitive. He spat into the gravel and stepped back. You think you're safe, he said. People like me don't forget. People like you, I answered, already lost what they came for. He stared, as if trying to decide whether I meant the boy or his power. Maybe both. Then he turned, trudging toward the gate. The headlights cut across the drive again before vanishing into the rain. I closed the door and leaned against it, letting the tremor travel through me. Not fear, release. The moment the latch clicked, the house felt mine in a way it never had before. Evan's legacy had tested me. Now it trusted me. I went to the console table where the teapot sat, still cool from morning. My hands shook as I poured water from the kettle, watching the thin steam curl upward. I thought of the children Evan had protected, the mothers who had written letters, and the one man who would rather destroy than change. Moral lines blur easily in theory, but become razor sharp when someone knocks on your door demanding surrender. I took my tea to the window. Outside, the rain had softened to mist. Headlights no longer glowed in the distance. The cliffs looked solid again, steady in their defiance. I felt Evan there, not as a ghost, but as a presence shaped by everything he had built. He had fought men like Victor with compassion instead of vengeance. With rules, he wrote himself because the world's rules failed. But I understood now what that cost him: Lena's trust, his peace, his marriage. Compassion and justice always at war. He chose the children, and by choosing them, he chose to stand alone. I whispered to the glass, "You didn't abandon me. You were protecting me from this." The reflection of my face merged with the storm's reflection outside. A woman framed by quiet strength. I remembered Arthur's words, "There are loves that must be hidden to keep someone else safe." It wasn't just Evan who had lived that truth. Now it was my turn. I moved to the cabinet where the hidden files were stored. With deliberate care, I rewired the camera system to Arthur's office, exactly as I had said. Victor might return, but this time he would not find a frightened widow. He would find proof of courage, of purpose, of the difference between hiding and harboring. The sea wind rattled the windows again, and I smiled slightly at the sound. A test, not a threat. Power, I realized, doesn't always come from shouting or striking. Sometimes it's the decision not to respond, to let silence stand as its own verdict. When I turned off the lights that night, I left the porch camera on. Its red light blinked faintly, steady as a heartbeat. Victor Sloan might think I had no one to protect me. He was wrong. I had a son whose courage still lived in these walls, and I had his silence, sharper than any weapon. The next morning was calm but cold. The sky carried that thin winter light that turns everything silver, even grief. I moved through the house barefoot, listening to the boards creak under my steps. Every sound felt deliberate now, every object charged with meaning. I brewed water in the kettle, steadying my breath with each movement. The teal porcelain teapot waited on the counter, chipped, loyal, familiar. It had outlasted my marriage, my husband, even my son. It was the one thing that had never lied. I lifted the lid and ran my finger along the crack. That small imperfection had never made it less useful. If anything, it poured better because of it. We pour better when we break a little. Thought. This was the moment I slowed down, the pivot between mourning and motion. I brewed the tea as if it were ritual, measure the leaves, pour the water, listen to the faint hiss as steam curled upward. In that quiet kitchen, surrounded by the aftermath of too many truths, I decided what to do. No grand speeches, no shouting, only the kind of steady resolve that leaves no fingerprints. Victor Sloan's words still echoed, "You don't have anyone left to protect you." He was wrong. I had Evan's truth, and truth, when tended carefully, can defend better than any locker weapon. I carried the cup to the table, opened Evan's laptop, and began. The files loaded slowly. Names, documents, case notes. I worked methodically, every click deliberate. The video archives contained not just security footage, but time-stamped records, encrypted folders labeled with case numbers. I transferred them to an external drive Arthur had once given Evan for legal research. The irony almost made me smile. Hours passed, marked only by the cooling of the tea and the rhythm of my breath. I wasn't rushing. I was reclaiming control, one piece of evidence at a time. In the hidden study, I gathered the letters from the corkboard, the handwritten ones from mothers, the drawings from children, the small Polaroids with dates in Evan's handwriting. I placed them into plastic sleeves, organized by year. My hands didn't shake. They moved with a librarian's precision, because that's what I was before I was anyone's mother, before the world began measuring me only by who I'd lost. I copied every letter onto a second drive, one for Arthur, one to keep here. Evidence wasn't just protection, it was testimony. And I would make sure my son's story wasn't rewritten into scandal or myth. At noon, I brewed a second pot of tea, this time for strength rather than comfort. The ritual steadied me. Boil, steep, pour. The scent filled the air like memory. I sat at the table, sunlight cutting across the wood, and began sorting the financial files. There it was, a chain of small, anonymous bank transfers. Each one modest, no more than a few $100s, all labeled under medical consultation codes. They came from accounts belonging to social workers, nonprofits, and sometimes individuals whose names matched those on the letters. Evan hadn't taken payment. He'd rerouted money back to shelters, legal aid, therapy for the children. His transactions were threads of protection, carefully woven beneath bureaucracy. I printed statements, flagged entries, and marked the final transfer he ever made, 2 days before his death. It was to a clinic fund under Grace M's name. Grace, the woman in the letter, the one he had trusted when he trusted no one else. Maybe she still lived somewhere close. Maybe she was still protecting someone too. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the windows. I looked out at the sea, waves folding and breaking in endless repetition, destruction as rhythm, persistence as law. Then I went to the closet, the one filled with children's clothes and toys. I took a photo of every shelf, every tag, every note. I cataloged it all as evidence. When I reached the little backpack labeled Leo, I hesitated. Inside was a drawing, a boy standing beside a tall man and a smaller woman, all three smiling beneath a sun. I was there, drawn faintly in the corner. an older figure pouring from a teapot. My breath caught. Evan must have told them about me. I placed the drawing in a folder marked Legacy. It struck me then that I was no longer cleaning up after my son's life. I was continuing it, turning chaos into archive, compassion into record. I didn't tell Arthur yet. I wanted the work finished before anyone could warn me of the risks. The danger didn't frighten me. Living unfinished frightened me more. When evening fell, I set everything on the kitchen table. The drives, the letters, the photos, the notebook. A single candle flickered beside the teapot, its flame thin but unwavering. This wasn't revenge. It was clear. I wasn't planning to expose Victor Sloan in fury. I was going to dismantle him with order, the same way Evan had fought chaos, one documented truth at a time. The house had become a command center of quiet defiance. Each page, each clip, each record whispered the same vow: protect them. And I would. I sealed one envelope addressed to Arthur, labeled, "To be opened if anything happens." Inside, I placed the smaller drive and a note written in my own hand: Arthur, the files speak for themselves. Whatever the law couldn't see, let compassion finish. UH. Then I made a second envelope for myself, labeled for Grace. I didn't know yet where to send it, but I knew I would find her. The kettle whistled again, sharp and steady. I poured another cup of tea. Slower this time, deliberate. Every motion a promise. The jade-green porcelain glowed against the lamplight, and I realized I was no longer pouring for memory. I was pouring for momentum. As steam rose, I whispered to Evan's photograph propped on the counter, "You taught me silence. Now it's my turn to use it." Outside, the horizon darkened to indigo. The sea kept beating its eternal rhythm, but inside the house, there was a new one. The rhythm of paper being stacked, evidence being sealed, truth being prepared. For years, I had believed silence meant surrender. But tonight, it was strategy. And as I lifted the teacup to my lips, the porcelain warm against my hands, I understood fully. I wasn't a relic of my son's story. It was its next chapter. It took me 2 days to finish organizing the files, 2 days of moving through the house like a quiet current, sorting truth into folders and lies into evidence. When everything was ready, I called Arthur. He arrived that evening, coat collar up against the wind, his briefcase tucked under one arm. I had placed everything neatly on the kitchen table, drives labeled by date, binders categorized by case, a stack of printed photos, and a sealed envelope marked for CPS. Arthur looked at the arrangement, then at me. "You've been busy." "I've been careful," I said. He nodded, sat, and opened the first binder. His hands, always steady, trembled slightly as he read. Every page spoke for Evan more clearly than any eulogy ever could. Medical notes, statements, letters from children and mothers, the unbroken line of goodness. After a long silence, he said softly, "You've built a stronger case than any lawyer could." I poured tea for both of us, the teal porcelain pot warm between my palms. I just followed his trail. Arthur studied the documents, eyes scanning the details with professional precision. "This is more than moral testimony. This is evidence of systemic failure. CPS missed repeated reports from the same families. And here," he tapped one sheet, "financial transfers showing he used his own accounts to fund relocation for victims." He sighed. He was careful, but not invisible. If this had gone public while he was alive, he might have been prosecuted for obstruction, or worse. I met his gaze. He knew the risk. Arthur looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look that carried both sorrow and respect. "So what do you want me to do?" "Finish what he started," I said. "Send everything to the right people. No press, no noise, just the truth where it belongs." He hesitated. "The police?" "And CPS," I said. "The children deserve safety that doesn't rely on secrets anymore." He nodded slowly. "All right. I'll make copies, remove your name from every file, and deliver them directly. You'll stay out of it." "That's what he wanted," I said quietly. Arthur packed the evidence into his briefcase layer by layer, careful as though handling something alive. When he closed the latch, it sounded final, like the closing of a chapter neither of us had written, but both had inherited. "Once this starts," he said, "there will be noise, investigations, headlines maybe, but the right people will know who made it possible." I shook my head. "Let them think it was all him. That's how it should be." He hesitated, then smiled, a tired, proud smile. "You're your son's mother, all right." After he left, I stood by the window and watched his car disappear down the winding road. The sea reflected faint light from the clouds, pale and endless. I thought of Evan walking those same cliffs, planning how to save people the world had already given up on. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without dreams. 3 days later, Arthur called. "They acted fast," he said. "The files were clear. They contacted the district office and reopened multiple abuse cases tied to the names Evan documented." My breath caught. "And Victor?" "They found him," Arthur said. His voice carried the calm of someone who'd seen justice unfold in increments, rarely in lightning strikes. "The videos you saved, the ones showing him threatening the boy, were enough. Police took him into custody this morning. CPS issued an emergency custody ruling. He's being charged with child endangerment, domestic assault, and obstruction." I gripped the edge of the counter. "Leo?" "Safe," Arthur said. "He's staying with Grace for now, pending permanent placement." She gave a statement. She mentioned Evan, said he saved them both. I closed my eyes. Relief came not as a flood, but as quiet warmth spreading through my chest, like sunlight returning to a cold room. Arthur continued. "The officers who reviewed the case files were stunned. One of them told me, 'Whoever built this archive knew exactly what they were doing.'" I smiled faintly. "He always did." "They'll never make it public," Arthur said. "They'll protect the children's names. But every one of those letters you preserved will be entered into record. It'll stand, Ursula. His work will stand." I let the silence hold for a moment, then softly, "That's all I wanted." That evening, I brewed tea again. This time, I didn't cry while it steeped. The sound of the kettle didn't ache anymore. It felt like punctuation. The house seemed to exhale, the walls lighter somehow, as if the weight of its hidden purpose had finally shifted into peace. I set 2 cups on the table, one for me, one for the son who would never sit across from me again. "Justice doesn't fix loss," I said into the still air, "but it honors it." The wind outside was gentle, no longer the raging voice of the past few weeks. For the first time, I let myself remember Evan not as a martyr or mystery, but as the boy who once worried that his mother would be lonely when he went off to college. I smiled through tears at the memory of him running back up the steps that day, out of breath, handing me a tiny parcel wrapped in newspaper, the same teal teapot I held now. He'd said, "So you'll never have tea alone." Now, even in his absence, I wasn't. Every child he'd helped, every person he'd healed, every truth he'd written, they sat quietly with me in spirit. The phone buzzed again. Arthur's text this time. "It's done. Victor denied bail." I typed back only 3 words. "Thank you, Arthur." Then I added one more, to myself, to the sea, to the silence that had carried me through everything. "Thank you, Evan." I lifted my cup, the porcelain warm, fragrant with the scent of forgiveness. Outside, the horizon softened into light. Justice had spoken, but it was his quiet work, his unseen kindness, that had made the law finally listen. Spring came quietly to the coast, softening the sharpness of winter. The sea outside the windows no longer roared. It breathed. The gulls returned, and the air carried a faint scent of salt and new beginnings. I spent my mornings opening windows, letting the wind sweep through rooms that had once held too many secrets. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt unfinished, like a story waiting for its next chapter. I stood in the doorway of what used to be the hidden study. The walls were bare now, the corkboard cleared, the files gone. But I didn't want to erase Evan's presence. I wanted to continue it, transform what he built in silence into something that could speak freely. That's when the idea came to me, not as a flash of inspiration, but as a calm certainty, the kind that feels less like invention and more like remembrance. I called Arthur first. "I've made a decision," I said. "I'm not selling the house." He hesitated, probably thinking of the estate value. "Are you sure, Ursula? It's a large property, maintenance alone." "I'm sure," I interrupted gently. "This house was built on kindness. It deserves to keep sheltering it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, in that measured tone I'd grown to trust, he said, "What do you want to do with it?" I looked around at the sunlight spilling across the floorboards. "I want to open it again, but this time legally, with structure and funding. A place for women and children who need a start. We'll call it Ursula's Haven House." Arthur exhaled, half sigh, half smile. "That's beautiful. Evan would approve." "I think he already did," I said. The following weeks were filled with motion, the kind of quiet labor that builds something lasting. Permits, paperwork, endless meetings with local agencies. I learned the language of grants and codes, of zoning and liability. Each signature felt like a small rebellion against despair. Grace helped me. She had the experience, the heart, and the credibility with the social workers. The first day she stepped back into the house, she stopped by the window overlooking the sea. "It feels safe here," she whispered. "You can tell when a place was built out of love." We began transforming rooms. One became a small counseling space, another a children's corner filled with books and art supplies. I kept the teal teapot in the kitchen, right where it had always been. Every visitor was offered a cup of tea before any paperwork began. It became a ritual, warmth before formality. I never hung a photo of Evan on the wall. His legacy didn't need a frame. It lived in the laughter of children coloring on the porch, in the steady rhythm of footsteps, returning each morning for help. One evening, after everyone had left, I sat at the kitchen table alone, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the only sound. The lamp cast a golden circle around me, catching the glint of the teapot's glaze. I traced its handle with my fingertip and thought of the years I'd spent believing that silence meant invisibility. But now I understand. Silence had always been a kind of strength. It just needed the right moment to speak. I walked through the hallway, touching each doorframe, each newly painted wall. At the end of the corridor, I paused at the front door, the same one Evan had once locked to protect those inside. Now it stood open, wide and bright. "There are doors," I said softly, repeating words that had lived in me since the beginning, that must close so others can open. Outside, the sky was turning violet. The lights from the nearby town shimmered on the horizon. I felt no ache, no loneliness, only stillness, the kind that comes when something broken has found its form again. I stepped onto the porch, letting the night air brush my face. The sound of waves reached me faintly, steady and eternal. I thought of Evan, and of every person who would one day cross this threshold searching for safety. They would find it here, and maybe, without ever knowing, they would also find him. Ursula's Haven House opened its doors 3 months later. The first plaque on the wall read, "In honor of those who loved quietly and healed without being seen." It was all the memorial my son ever needed, and all the purpose I would ever need again. The sea glowed gold at dusk. From the porch I could see the horizon melt into light, the way grief sometimes softens when you stop fighting it. The air carried salt and jasmine, and somewhere below, the laughter of children echoed through the courtyard. It had been 6 months since Ursula's Haven House opened its doors, 6 months since silence turned into shelter. The house was never truly quiet now, footsteps, laughter, sometimes tears. But even those sounds felt sacred. They were proof that life had come back to the place my son once guarded in secrecy. I sat on the wooden chair Evan had built when he was 16. The paint had faded, the wood rough with time, but it held my weight as easily as it once held his. On the small table beside me was the teal porcelain teapot, still chipped near the spout. I poured steaming water into 2 cups, one for me and one for memory. Inside, Grace was finishing paperwork with a new volunteer, her voice calm and sure. The children had finished dinner, lentil soup and bread baked that morning. A few of them still played outside, chasing bubbles that shimmered in the last of the light. One boy, maybe 6 years old, lingered near the porch steps. He had the soft kind of eyes that seem older than their years, as if life had taught him too much, too soon. "Miss Ursula?" he said shyly. I smiled. "Yes, sweetheart?" He hesitated, gripping the railing. "Can I sit here?" "Of course," I said, patting the chair beside me. "You don't have to ask." He climbed up carefully, small hands brushing dust off his jeans. For a moment, we just listened to the waves. After a while, he looked at me and whispered, "It feels like home. Here." The words caught in my throat. Simple, unguarded, true. I reached over and touched his shoulder lightly. "That's exactly what it's meant to feel like." He nodded and watched the sea, content in the kind of silence only children understand, one that doesn't need filling. I poured a little tea into my own cup, the faint aroma of mint rising with the steam. I remembered Evan sitting at this very spot one summer, years ago, sketching the shoreline as I read beside him. Back then, I thought we were just a family like any other. I hadn't yet learned that love sometimes means keeping certain truths in shadow until the world is ready to see them. When the boy ran off to join the others, I sat back, letting the quiet settle again. Grace stepped out onto the porch, her hair catching the orange light. "They're going to sleep early tonight," she said. "We had story hour, and half of them fell asleep before I finished reading." "That's a good sign," I said. "It means they finally feel safe." She smiled, her eyes soft with understanding. "You did this, Ursula." I shook my head. "We did this. Evan planted the seed. We just let it grow in daylight." She looked out at the horizon. "He'd be proud." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The waves kept their rhythm, constant and eternal, and the first stars began to appear, tiny punctures in the sky. Grace went back inside, leaving me alone with the sea. I poured another cup of tea, wrapping my hands around the warmth. The chipped edge of the teapot pressed against my palm, grounding me in the present. Once I thought that when you lose your child, the world ends, that your story stops where theirs does. But sitting there, hearing the laughter echo through the open windows, I realized something gentler. Sometimes love changes form, not direction. Evan's love hadn't vanished, it had multiplied. Every child who crossed our doorstep carried a piece of it forward. Every woman who found courage to begin again added to the quiet legacy he built. I leaned back, breathing in the salt air. "You were right, my son," I whispered. "Some love has to hide first, so others can survive." The porch light flickered on as evening deepened. I could see the reflection of the teapot in the window, its turquoise shimmer like a heartbeat. Across the yard, the smallest of the children stopped and waved at me from the swing. "Good night, Miss Ursula." "Good night, darling," I called back. "Sweet dreams." He smiled, then shouted, "See you in the morning. Don't forget the tea." I laughed softly. I never do. When he disappeared inside, I stayed there, watching the last traces of daylight fade into the sea. My life had once been full of closed doors, literal and invisible ones, doors that kept me out, that silenced my questions, that made me feel like an afterthought. But not anymore. Now I opened doors for others, and in doing so, I had finally opened my own. The wind picked up, brushing against my hair like a gentle hand. Somewhere in that motion, I felt Evan's presence, not as a ghost, but as something alive in every sound around me. "I'm not the one left behind anymore," I whispered. "I'm exactly where I was meant to be." A tear slipped down my cheek, not from sorrow, but from peace. I looked toward the house, the lights glowing warm through the windows, the sound of children's laughter mixing with the steady hum of the ocean. For the first time in years, the silence inside me wasn't empty. It was full. I lifted my cup in a small, private toast. To you, Evan, to Grace, to new beginnings. The sea answered with a soft crash against the rocks, a rhythm older than grief, older than love, but somehow holding both. And then I said the words that had carried me from loss to purpose, from silence to voice. Sometimes the doors that close do so only to lead us exactly where we belong. The teapot gleamed in the porch light, the steam curling upward like a final prayer. The waves rolled on, patient and endless, and I smiled, knowing that at last every closed door had brought me home,